What would you do if you discovered your husband was not only cheating on you, but had no idea you could destroy his entire career with a single phone call? Meet Jennifer Harrison, a billionaire heiress who's been living as a middle-class wife for 3 years, watching her abusive husband steal millions from her own family's company. He thinks he married beneath him. He has no clue she owns the empire he's been robbing. But when Marcus crosses the final line and threatens their unborn child, Jennifer decides it's time to reveal who she really is. What happens next? A public downfall so spectacular, it was captured on live camera in front of 500 of Manhattan's most powerful people. This is the story of the ultimate revenge, where justice isn't just served cold, it's served with a side of poetic irony that will leave you speechless. Trust me, you won't see this ending coming. And that's how a man who thought he was untouchable learned that karma has perfect timing and an even better sense of justice. If this story of justice and empowerment resonated with you, smash that like button. It really helps the algorithm share these powerful stories with others who need to hear them. Drop a comment below. What would you have done in Jennifer's situation? Would you have exposed him publicly or handled it privately? And if you're craving more incredible true stories of people who got exactly what they deserved, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Because trust me, we're just getting started with these jaw-dropping tales of justice served. Share this with someone who needs to hear that no one, and I mean no one, is too powerful to face consequences for their actions. Until next time, remember the truth always finds a way to surface, sometimes in the most spectacular fashion possible. The security camera captured everything in crystal clear high definition. The elegant charity gala at the Manhattan penthouse, the moment of impact, the collective gasp of 500 witnesses. But what the camera couldn't capture was the years of careful planning that led to that single devastating slap. My name is Jennifer Harrison, though for 3 years my husband knew me as Jen Parker. At 28, I possessed a Harvard MBA and a secret that would have changed everything had Marcus known the truth. I was the sole heiress to Harrison Tech Empire, worth $2.4 billion. But Marcus Sterling believed he had married a middle-class consultant whose father owned a small tech company. The deception wasn't born from malice, it was born from necessity. I met Marcus at a coffee shop near Columbia University, where I was guest lecturing on emerging markets. He was everything society told women to want: tall, successful, charming. His investment portfolio at Harrison Holdings was impressive. His suits were tailored, and his smile could light up a room. What I didn't see then were the shadows behind that smile. Marcus believed he was the prize in our relationship. He would joke with friends about how he had married up through my family connections, never suspecting that the woman serving him coffee each morning could buy his entire division without consulting her accountant. The irony was delicious, until it became dangerous. Our penthouse overlooked Central Park, paid for by what Marcus assumed was family money. Designer clothes filled my closet, charged to credit cards he never questioned. Private jets whisked us to weekend getaways that he attributed to my father's growing business. Marcus lived in luxury while believing he was the provider, the success story, the one with real power. But power is a funny thing. Real power whispers while insecurity shouts. The first red flag appeared 6 months into our marriage. Marcus began monitoring my spending. Despite never contributing to our household expenses, he would question expensive purchases, demand receipts, and lecture me about financial responsibility. When I gently reminded him that my family's money covered our lifestyle, his jaw would tighten. "Your father's money," he would correct, "not yours." The second red flag was his treatment of service staff, waiters, housekeepers. Drivers all became targets for his condescension. He would snap his fingers for attention, complain about service with theatrical outrage, and tip poorly while making a show of his generosity. I watched him humiliate a young hotel clerk in Paris because our suite wasn't ready exactly at check-in time. "Do you know who I am?" he had demanded. The clerk, clearly overwhelmed, stammered an apology. Marcus turned to me with satisfaction. Sometimes people need to understand their place. I should have seen it then. The need to dominate, the pleasure he took in others' discomfort, the way he confused cruelty with strength. But love, especially young love, has a remarkable capacity for self-deception. I told myself his behavior stemmed from work stress. Investment banking was competitive. Marcus carried tremendous pressure. Surely, the man who brought me roses every Friday and whispered sweet promises in the dark couldn't be cruel. Then I discovered I was pregnant. The test showed positive on a Tuesday morning in October. Marcus had already left for work, coffee cup abandoned on the granite countertop. Wall Street Journal folded to the financial section. I stood in our marble bathroom, holding the plastic stick that would change everything, and felt simultaneously elated and terrified. When I told Marcus that evening, his reaction was everything I had hoped for. He swept me into his arms, spun me around our living room, and immediately began planning the nursery. We would need a bigger place, he declared, somewhere with room for a proper family. His eyes sparkled with dreams of little league games and piano recitals. For 2 beautiful weeks, Marcus was the man I had fallen in love with. Attentive, gentle, protective. He researched prenatal vitamins, scheduled doctor appointments, and even bought pregnancy books. I believed we had turned a corner. I was wrong. The change began subtly. Comments about my appearance as my body started changing. Complaints about my energy levels when pregnancy fatigue set in. Frustration when morning sickness interfered with social events. Marcus's support transformed into criticism. His protection became control. "You're being dramatic," became his favorite phrase. "Other women work full-time through pregnancy. Other women don't complain constantly." But it was the financial control that truly revealed his nature. Marcus began insisting that my pregnancy required careful budgeting. He wanted access to all accounts, complete oversight of all spending. When I gently refused, his charm evaporated entirely. "If we're going to be a family," he said, his voice cold, "we need to make decisions together. Real families don't keep secrets." The irony was staggering. Marcus spoke of secrets while living in a penthouse paid for by money he didn't know existed. Driving cars registered to companies he had never heard of. Wearing watches that cost more than his annual salary. But in his mind, I was the deceptive one for maintaining my financial independence. That's when I realized that my husband didn't love Jennifer Harrison. He loved Jen Parker, the fictional middle-class woman who needed him, who depended on him, who made him feel important. The real me, with real power and real money, threatened everything he believed about himself. And threatened men can be very dangerous indeed. The first time Marcus raised his voice at me, I was 12 weeks pregnant and struggling with severe morning sickness. I had canceled dinner with his colleagues because I couldn't keep food down, and Marcus returned home that evening with barely contained rage. "Do you understand how this makes me look?" he demanded, pacing our living room like a caged animal. "I tell everyone my wife will be there, and then she just doesn't show up." I tried to explain about the nausea, the exhaustion, the way pregnancy was affecting my body, but Marcus wasn't listening. He was performing, practicing speeches he would later deliver to friends about his difficult wife. "My mother worked 2 jobs while pregnant with my sister," he continued. "She never missed a single obligation, but somehow you can't handle a simple dinner." The comparison stung, but not as much as the realization that Marcus genuinely believed his frustration mattered more than my physical well-being. This wasn't about concern for my health or understanding pregnancy challenges. This was about his image, his reputation, his convenience. I began paying closer attention to how Marcus spoke about other women. His secretary was incompetent when she couldn't schedule impossible meeting conflicts. The female partner at his firm was too emotional when she disagreed with his strategies. His sister was selfish for prioritizing her children over family gatherings. A pattern emerged. In Marcus's world, women existed to support, accommodate, and enhance men's lives. Any deviation from this script was labeled as selfishness, incompetence, or emotional instability. But I still believed love could overcome conditioning. I still thought patience and understanding might help Marcus recognize his prejudices. I was naive enough to think that carrying his child would make him see me as more than an accessory to his success. Then I discovered the affair. It was a Thursday afternoon in November. I had come home early from a doctor's appointment, my heart full of excitement about sharing the ultrasound images with Marcus. The baby was healthy, developing perfectly, and the doctor had commented on strong heartbeat. I wanted to plan the nursery, discuss names, maybe start shopping for baby clothes. I found them in our bedroom, Marcus and my best friend Sarah, tangled in sheets I had selected, surrounded by wedding photos we had taken just 2 years earlier. The ultrasound pictures fell from my hands and scattered across the hardwood floor like broken promises. Sarah scrambled to cover herself, her face flushed with shame and panic. But Marcus looked annoyed at the interruption. Not guilty, not remorseful. Annoyed. "Jennifer," he said, as if my presence in my own bedroom was unexpected. "I thought you were at the doctor." The casual tone broke something inside me. Not my heart, which had already shattered, but my illusions. My capacity for self-deception, my willingness to make excuses for inexcusable behavior. Sarah gathered her clothes and fled, mumbling apologies that meant nothing. Marcus wrapped a towel around his waist and sat on the edge of our bed. The same bed where he had held me through morning sickness, where we had made plans for our future family. "We need to talk," he said. I stood in the doorway, one hand instinctively protecting my growing belly, and waited. "This doesn't have to change anything," Marcus continued. "Sarah means nothing. You're pregnant. We have obligations now. Obligations. Not love, not commitment, not even respect. Obligations. You're having an affair with my best friend," I said quietly. "In our bed, while I'm carrying your child." Marcus sighed, as if my emotional response was tedious. "Jennifer, let's be realistic. Pregnancy has been difficult for you. You're tired all the time. You can't keep up with social commitments. And frankly, you haven't been very available lately." Available, as if I were a service being temporarily interrupted. "So this is my fault." "It's nobody's fault," he said. "It's biology. Men have needs. This is temporary. Once the baby comes and you get back to normal, things will be different." I stared at this man I had married, this man whose child was growing inside me, and realized I had never really known him at all. The Marcus I thought I loved was as fictional as the Jen Parker he believed he had married. "I want you to leave," I said. Marcus laughed. Actually laughed. "Jennifer, you're being dramatic. Where am I supposed to go? This is my home too." "No," I said, my voice growing stronger. "This is my home. These are my assets. This is my life, and I want you out." Something dangerous flashed in Marcus's eyes. For the first time since I had known him, his charm completely disappeared. What remained was cold, calculating, and utterly without warmth. "Careful," he said softly. "You're emotional right now. Pregnancy hormones. You might say something you regret." The threat was barely veiled. Marcus was reminding me that in his version of our story, I was the unstable one, the overly emotional wife who couldn't handle her husband's perfectly reasonable needs. "And if you're thinking about doing something dramatic," he continued, "remember that I have friends at the firm, people who care about my reputation, people who would be very concerned if my pregnant wife started spreading lies about me." I felt the baby flutter inside me, a tiny reminder of everything at stake. Marcus was right about one thing. I was vulnerable, pregnant, emotionally devastated, and completely unprepared for the war he was threatening to wage. But Marcus had made one crucial miscalculation. He thought he was dealing with Jen Parker, the middle-class consultant who needed his support and feared his connections. He had no idea he was threatening Jennifer Harrison, and Jennifer Harrison had resources he couldn't imagine. That night, after Marcus finally left for a hotel, I sat in my study and made 3 phone calls. The first was to my lawyer, the second was to my accountant, the third was to a private investigator whose services came very highly recommended. If Marcus wanted to play games about reputation and lies, I would give him a masterclass in both. The war had begun. Detective Jake Morrison looked nothing like what I expected from a private investigator. Instead of the stereotypical rumpled coat and cynical demeanor, Jake was polished, professional, and surprisingly young. At 35, he had the bearing of someone accustomed to command, which made sense given his background as an NYPD detective who had specialized in financial crimes. "Mrs. Sterling," he said, settling into the leather chair across from my desk. "I understand you need help with a delicate matter. I had chosen Jake's firm based on their reputation for discretion and their success rate with high-net-worth clients. What I hadn't expected was the immediate sense of competence he projected, or the way his presence made me feel safer than I had in weeks. "My husband is having an affair," I began, then stopped. The words sounded so ordinary, so common. Women discovered cheating husbands every day, but this wasn't just about infidelity. There's more to it than that, I continued. I have reason to believe he's involved in financial improprieties at work, and I think he may be harassing other women. Jake opened a leather portfolio and removed a yellow legal pad. Let's start with what you know for certain, then we'll work on what you suspect. Over the next 2 hours, I laid out everything. Marcus's pattern of financial control, his treatment of female colleagues, his comments about women in general, the affair with Sarah, which I suspected wasn't his first, and my growing concern that his behavior might escalate, especially given my pregnancy. You mentioned financial improprieties, Jake said. What makes you think that? I hesitated. This was where my deception became complicated. My family has some investments with his firm. I've noticed irregularities in the reporting. It wasn't entirely a lie. Harrison Holdings did have investments managed by Marcus's division. What I didn't mention was that my family owned the entire company. Jake made notes without judgment. And you're concerned about other potential victims. There's a woman at his office, Emma Rodriguez. She's young, recently hired, and I've noticed Marcus pays her particular attention at company events. The way he talks about her, looks at her, it makes me uncomfortable. Has she indicated any problems? Not directly. But she seems nervous around him, and Marcus has been staying late more often lately, claiming to mentor junior staff. Jake nodded grimly. We'll look into it. What are your goals here? Mrs. Sterling, what outcome are you hoping for? I had been thinking about this question for days. What did I want? Justice, revenge, protection? All of the above. I want documentation, I said finally. I want evidence of everything he's done, everyone he's hurt, and I want him to face consequences. Legal consequences. Whatever consequences fit his crimes. Jake studied me for a moment. This could get complicated. If we uncover criminal activity, I'm legally obligated to report it. Are you prepared for that level of scrutiny? I thought about Emma Rodriguez, about Sarah, about all the women Marcus had dismissed and diminished, about the baby growing inside me, who deserved better than a father who viewed women as disposable. Yes, I said, I'm prepared. Jake's investigation began immediately. Within a week, he had compiled a preliminary report that made my blood run cold. Marcus wasn't just having an affair with Sarah. He was having affairs with multiple women, including 2 colleagues at Harrison Holdings. But the financial irregularities were even more concerning. Jake had discovered a pattern of unusual transactions in accounts Marcus managed. Money moved between funds without proper documentation. Fees charged to clients that didn't appear on official records. Small amounts, carefully disguised, but consistent over time. He's embezzling, Jake explained during our second meeting. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would trigger immediate audits. But over 3 years, we're talking about approximately $5 million. $5 million, more than enough for federal charges, more than enough to destroy his career permanently. There's something else, Jake continued. Emma Rodriguez. She's been experiencing harassment, but she's afraid to report it officially. My heart sank. What kind of harassment? Inappropriate comments about her appearance, unwanted touching during meetings, suggestions that her career advancement depends on her willingness to be flexible about boundaries. I felt sick. While I had been playing the role of the wronged wife, Marcus had been terrorizing a young woman who needed her job, who couldn't afford to fight back. I want to help her, I said. Carefully, Jake warned. If Marcus suspects you're involved, he could retaliate against both of you. Right now, he thinks you're just an emotional pregnant wife. Let's keep it that way while we build the case. But Marcus was more observant than we realized. He had noticed changes in my behavior, my growing confidence, my refusal to be intimidated by his threats. He began testing boundaries, pushing harder to see how I would respond. The confrontations escalated gradually. Arguments about money became arguments about respect. Discussions about the baby became battles about control. Marcus's mask slipped more frequently, revealing the angry, entitled man beneath the charming exterior. 3 weeks after hiring Jake, Marcus played his most dangerous card yet. I've been thinking about our situation, he announced over dinner at our usual restaurant. This pregnancy has been hard on you. Maybe too hard. I looked up from my untouched pasta, immediately alert to the threat in his tone. Maybe you're not ready for motherhood, he continued. Maybe we should consider other options. Other options, adoption, or termination. It's not too late. The suggestion hit me like a physical blow. Marcus was threatening my pregnancy, my child, as a tool of control. You can't be serious, I whispered. I'm thinking about what's best for everyone, he said smoothly. You're clearly struggling. You're emotional. You're making accusations. You're not thinking clearly. Maybe this is too much responsibility for you right now. I understood the subtext. Submit completely or lose everything that mattered to me. But Marcus had made another critical error. He thought he was dealing with a woman who had no options, no resources, no power to fight back. That night, I called Jake with new instructions. We weren't just building a case anymore. We were going to war. And in war, sometimes you have to be willing to sacrifice everything to protect what matters most. The baby fluttered inside me, as if agreeing with the decision. Whatever it took, whatever the cost, Marcus Sterling would never threaten my child again. Emma Rodriguez was 24 years old, a recent graduate from NYU with a finance degree and dreams of making it on Wall Street. She had worked at Harrison Holdings for 8 months, and in that time, Marcus had systematically destroyed her confidence and peace of mind. Jake arranged a meeting at a coffee shop in Brooklyn, far from the financial district where Emma might be recognized. She arrived nervous, glancing over her shoulder, clutching her purse like a shield. "I shouldn't be here," were her first words. "If Mr. Sterling finds out I'm talking to anyone about him, he won't find out from us," Jake assured her. "And you're not in any trouble. We just want to understand what's been happening." Emma's story unfolded slowly, painfully. It had started with compliments that felt inappropriate, but could be explained away. Comments about her appearance, her clothes, how she looked tired or stressed. Then came the touching, a hand on her shoulder during meetings, fingers brushing hers when he handed her documents, standing too close in elevators. I told myself I was overreacting, Emma said, tears beginning to form. He's a senior executive. He's married. I thought maybe this was normal office culture, and I was just being too sensitive. But the harassment had escalated. Marcus began scheduling late meetings with Emma alone. He would comment on her personal life, ask about her dating situation, suggest that successful women needed to be flexible about boundaries. Last month, he told me that my performance review was coming up, Emma continued. He said there were concerns about my work quality, but that he wanted to help me improve. He suggested we discuss it over dinner, somewhere private where we could talk freely. "Did you go?" Jake asked gently. "No, I made excuses. But then my assignments started getting more difficult. He would give me projects with impossible deadlines, then criticize me when I couldn't complete them perfectly. Other colleagues started treating me differently, like I was incompetent." I listened to Emma's story with growing rage. Marcus was using his position to systematically break down a young woman's career because she wouldn't submit to his advances. This wasn't just harassment, it was professional terrorism. "There's something else," Emma said quietly. "There are rumors about other women, a woman named Jessica who left the firm suddenly last year, and Linda from accounting, who transferred to the Los Angeles office with no explanation." Jake made careful notes. "Would you be willing to document these incidents formally? Write down dates, times, specific conversations?" Emma hesitated. "What would happen then?" "We're gathering evidence about Mr. Sterling's behavior," I said carefully. "Not just toward you, but toward other women as well. You wouldn't be alone in this." "But if I come forward, my career is over," Emma said. "He has connections everywhere. He could make sure I never work in finance again." I understood her fear completely. Marcus wielded his professional reputation like a weapon, threatening anyone who dared to challenge him. But Emma didn't know she was talking to someone with the power to protect her. "What if I could guarantee your job security?" I asked. "What if I could ensure that speaking up would advance your career instead of ending it?" Emma looked confused. "How could you possibly guarantee that?" Jake and I exchanged glances. We had discussed this possibility, but it meant revealing more of my identity than I preferred. Let's just say I have more influence than Mr. Sterling realizes, I said, but I need you to trust me. Over the following weeks, Emma began documenting everything: dates, times, witnesses, specific comments. Jake helped her preserve text messages and emails that showed the pattern of harassment and retaliation. Meanwhile, Jake's financial investigation had uncovered even more disturbing evidence. Marcus wasn't just embezzling money, he was using fraudulent accounts to hide his theft. He had created fake investment opportunities, charged clients for non-existent fees, and manipulated reporting to cover his tracks. But the most damaging discovery came from an unexpected source. Jake had been monitoring Marcus's communications when he intercepted a series of text messages between Marcus and a colleague named David Chen. The messages revealed that Marcus was actively working to undermine other women at the firm. He was spreading rumors about female colleagues' competence, manipulating assignment distributions to set women up for failure, and coordinating with other men to exclude women from important meetings and opportunities. This isn't just personal harassment, Jake explained. This is systematic discrimination. He's created an entire network designed to limit women's advancement at the company. The evidence was overwhelming, but it also revealed how deeply entrenched Marcus's influence had become. He had allies throughout the firm, men who benefited from the system he had created, and women who were too afraid to challenge it. As Jake's investigation continued, Marcus's behavior at home deteriorated further. He had moved back into our penthouse after a week at the hotel, claiming that his absence looked suspicious to colleagues, but his presence was increasingly hostile. He monitored my phone calls, questioned my activities, and made increasingly explicit threats about what would happen if I embarrassed him publicly. When I refused to attend a work function because of pregnancy fatigue, he grabbed my arm hard enough to leave bruises. "You will be there," he said, his voice cold with fury. "You will smile, you will be charming, and you will make me look good. Because if you don't, if you make me look like a man who can't control his own wife, there will be consequences." I looked at the bruises on my arm that night and realized that Marcus's violence wasn't a possibility anymore. It was a reality, and it would only escalate from here. The next morning, I made a decision that would change everything. I called Diana Blackwell, the CEO of Harrison Holdings, and requested a private meeting. It was time to reveal my true identity. Diana had been running Harrison Holdings for 3 years, ever since my father's retirement. She was brilliant, tough, and uncompromising about the company's ethical standards. She was also, I knew, a domestic violence survivor herself. If anyone would understand the full scope of what Marcus represented, it would be Diana. The meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday. As I prepared to tell Diana everything, I felt the baby move inside me, a reminder of everything at stake. Marcus thought he was fighting a powerless woman. Instead, he was about to face the full force of a company he had never imagined he was stealing from, led by a woman who would not tolerate his behavior for one more day. The real war was about to begin. Diana Blackwell's corner office on the 52nd floor of the Harrison Holdings building commanded a spectacular view of Manhattan. As CEO, she had transformed the company from a successful tech firm into a diversified empire worth billions. What most people didn't know was that Diana had achieved this success while hiding scars from her own abusive marriage 20 years earlier. "Jennifer," she said, rising from her desk as I entered. "It's been too long. How are you feeling?" Diana knew me as the boss's daughter who had chosen to work in consulting rather than join the family business. She didn't know I was also Jen Parker, wife of Marcus Sterling, her own employee. "I need to tell you something," I began, settling into the chair across from her desk. "And it's going to be complicated." Over the next hour, I revealed everything. My marriage to Marcus under a false identity, his affairs, his harassment of employees, his embezzlement from company funds, the systematic discrimination he had orchestrated against female employees. Diana listened without interruption, her expression growing more serious with each revelation. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Show me the evidence," she said finally. Jake had prepared comprehensive documentation, financial records showing the embezzled funds, screenshots of discriminatory text messages, Emma's detailed account of harassment and retaliation, testimonies from other women who had been driven from the company. Diana reviewed everything methodically, her corporate training evident in how she absorbed and processed the information. But I could see something else in her expression, personal recognition of the patterns I was describing. This explains several things that haven't made sense, she said finally. We've had an unusual number of talented women leave the company over the past 2 years. Women who gave vague reasons for their departures, who seemed reluctant to discuss their experiences. Marcus has been systematically creating a hostile environment, I said, and he's been stealing from the company to fund his lifestyle. Diana's jaw tightened. The financial crimes alone are enough to destroy him, but this harassment pattern? She paused, and I could see her own memories surfacing. This is about more than money. This is about power and control. I want him stopped, I said. Not just fired. I want him to face consequences that match the damage he's done. What about your marriage, your pregnancy? I placed my hand on my growing belly. My child deserves better than a father who terrorizes women, and I deserve better than a husband who sees me as property to be controlled. Diana nodded slowly. What do you need from me? Help, I said simply, and protection for the women who are willing to come forward. Diana's response exceeded my expectations. Within 24 hours, she had assembled a legal team specializing in corporate fraud and workplace harassment. She also hired additional security personnel to protect Emma and the other potential witnesses. But most importantly, Diana began her own investigation into Marcus's activities. As CEO, she had access to records and communications that even Jake couldn't obtain. What she discovered was even more damning than we had suspected. Marcus had been running a sophisticated embezzlement scheme for over 3 years. He had created fake vendor accounts, charged fictitious consulting fees, and manipulated currency exchange rates to skim money from international transactions. The total theft exceeded $7 million, but the harassment was even more extensive than we had realized. Diana's investigation revealed that Marcus had driven at least 6 women from the company over 2 years. Each had left suddenly, citing personal reasons, after experiencing escalating harassment that followed the same pattern Emma was enduring. He's a predator, Diana said during our second meeting. A predator who has been using our company as his hunting ground. The legal team recommended going directly to federal authorities. The financial crimes crossed state lines and involved international transactions, making them federal offenses. The harassment pattern could be prosecuted under civil rights laws, but I had a different idea. I want him exposed publicly, I said. I want everyone to see exactly who Marcus Sterling really is. Diana raised an eyebrow. That's risky. Public exposure could complicate legal proceedings. Not if we control the narrative, I said. The company's annual charity gala is next month. 500 of the most influential people in finance will be there. If Marcus were to reveal his true nature in front of all those witnesses, you want to set a trap, Diana said. I want to give him enough rope to hang himself. The plan that emerged was elegant in its simplicity. We would allow Marcus to continue his behavior while secretly documenting everything. We would encourage his sense of power and control, making him believe he was winning. And then, at the charity gala, we would create a situation where his mask would slip completely in front of hundreds of witnesses and multiple cameras. But first, we had to protect Emma and the other potential victims. Diana quietly transferred Emma to a special projects division that reported directly to her office. The transfer came with a substantial raise in protection from retaliation for the other women who had left the company. Diana reached out personally to offer new positions and legal support. 3 of them agreed to return as witnesses, knowing they now had the CEO's protection. As the pieces fell into place, Marcus's behavior at home became increasingly erratic. He sensed that something was changing, but couldn't identify the threat. His control over me was slipping, and he responded with escalating aggression. The physical threats became more explicit. The financial control attempts became more desperate. The verbal abuse became more vicious. You think you're so smart, he said one evening, cornering me in our kitchen. You think you can play games with me? I know you're up to something. I don't know what you mean, I replied calmly. Don't lie to me, he shouted, slamming his hand on the granite countertop. You've been different, confident, like you know something I don't. I looked at this man who had once charmed me, who had promised to love and protect me, who was now threatening the mother of his unborn child, and I felt nothing but contempt. Maybe I'm just tired of being afraid of you, I said. Marcus's eyes narrowed dangerously. You should be afraid of me. You have no idea what I'm capable of. But Marcus was wrong. I knew exactly what he was capable of, because Jake had documented it all. The question was whether Marcus knew what I was capable of. As the charity gala approached, I felt the baby moving more frequently, as if sensing the approaching confrontation. Soon, the whole world would see Marcus Sterling for what he really was. And then, finally, justice would be served. The Harrison Holdings annual charity gala was traditionally held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, but this year Diana had chosen the penthouse ballroom of the Mandarin Oriental. The venue overlooked Central Park, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of the city lights below. 500 guests would attend, including Manhattan's most influential business leaders, politicians, and media personalities. The gala would be live-streamed to donors worldwide, with professional photographers and videographers documenting every moment. In other words, it was the perfect stage for Marcus Sterling's final performance. 3 days before the event, Jake delivered his final report. The evidence against Marcus was overwhelming: $7.2 million in documented theft, testimony from 8 women describing harassment and discrimination, and communications proving his coordination with other executives to exclude women from advancement opportunities. The federal prosecutor is ready to move forward, Jake informed me during our last private meeting. They have enough evidence to secure convictions on multiple felony charges. And the civil case, even stronger. The pattern of discrimination is so clear, so well documented, that Marcus's legal team will likely recommend settling immediately to avoid a trial. I nodded, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and exhaustion. The investigation had consumed 3 months of my life, 3 months during which my pregnancy had progressed and my marriage had deteriorated beyond any hope of repair. There's one more thing, Jake said hesitantly. Are you sure you want to go through with the public confrontation? We have enough evidence to destroy him quietly. You don't have to put yourself through the stress of a public scene. I understood Jake's concern. Over the months of working together, he had become more than just my investigator. He had become my friend, my confidant. And if I was honest with myself, something more. His concern for my welfare was genuine and personal. I need him to show everyone who he really is, I said. Not in a courtroom where he can play the victim. Not in a settlement where he can buy his way out of consequences. I need him to reveal himself when he thinks he has all the power. Jake nodded slowly. Then we'll make sure you're protected. Diana has arranged for additional security, and I'll be there personally. The night before the gala, Marcus came home in an unusually good mood. He had spent the day preparing for what he believed would be a triumphant evening. Several major clients would be attending, potential investors he had been courting, colleagues who admired his apparent success. This could be the night that changes everything for us, he said over dinner. Harrison Holdings is considering expanding the international division. If I handle tonight right, I could be looking at a promotion to senior vice president. I watched him describe his ambitions, his plans for our future, his excitement about advancing his career at the company he had been systematically robbing for years. The disconnect between his self-perception and reality was staggering. You seem confident, I said. I have every reason to be confident, Marcus replied. I've worked hard for this opportunity. I've built relationships, delivered results, proven my value to the company. Results. He meant the results he had achieved by driving talented women from their positions and stealing millions of dollars from client accounts. What about us? I asked. What about the baby? Marcus's expression softened slightly, though I now recognized the manipulation behind his charm. Tonight changes everything for our family too. Financial security, social status, a real future. Our child will grow up with every advantage. Every advantage except a father with integrity. That night, as Marcus slept beside me, I felt the baby moving restlessly. Tomorrow would be traumatic, publicly and personally, but it was necessary. My child deserved to grow up in a world where predators faced consequences for their actions. I had chosen a dress for the gala that was both elegant and strategic, a flowing black gown that accommodated my pregnancy while projecting strength and sophistication. I would look like the successful executive I actually was, not the dependent wife Marcus believed me to be. The morning of the gala, Marcus was practically vibrating with excitement. He had his hair cut, his shoes polished, his tuxedo pressed to perfection. He spent an hour in front of the mirror, practicing the smile he would use while networking with potential allies. "You look beautiful," he said as I emerged from our bedroom in the black gown. "Tonight is going to be perfect." Perfect. The word felt like prophecy, though not in the way Marcus intended. We arrived at the Mandarin Oriental in Marcus's Ferrari, a car paid for with embezzled funds, though he didn't know I knew that. The ballroom was already filling with guests when we entered, the champagne flowing and conversations beginning. Diana spotted us immediately and approached with a warm smile that revealed nothing of our secret alliance. "Marcus, Jennifer," she said graciously. "Thank you for being here tonight." "Marcus, I was hoping we could speak privately later about some exciting developments in the international division." Marcus's eyes lit up with anticipation. "Of course, Diana. I'm looking forward to discussing the expansion opportunities." As Diana moved away to greet other guests, Marcus turned to me with barely contained excitement. "Did you hear that she wants to discuss expansion opportunities? This is exactly what I've been working toward." I nodded and smiled, playing the supportive wife role one last time. Around us, the ballroom continued to fill with Manhattan's elite. Photographers moved through the crowd, capturing moments for society pages and corporate newsletters. Emma Rodriguez was there, looking confident and professional in her new role as Diana's special assistant. She caught my eye briefly and nodded almost imperceptibly. She was ready. Jake was positioned near the bar, dressed in an elegant black suit that made him blend seamlessly with the other guests. He was ready too. The trap was set. The players were in position. The cameras were rolling. All that remained was for Marcus Sterling to reveal his true nature to the world. The charity auction began at 9 o'clock, with Diana serving as the evening's host. She was magnificent, poised, articulate, commanding the attention of 500 influential guests while maintaining the warm charm that made her so effective as a leader. Tonight, we celebrate not just our company's success, but our commitment to supporting victims of domestic violence, Diana announced from the podium. Too many talented individuals, particularly women, find their potential limited by those who abuse their power. The irony of her words, given Marcus's presence in the audience, was not lost on me. I watched his face as Diana spoke, noting his slight frown as she emphasized the importance of supporting vulnerable women. "Now," Diana continued, "I'd like to invite some of our team members to share their perspectives on creating inclusive workplace environments." This was not part of the original program. I felt Marcus tense beside me as Diana called Emma Rodriguez to the podium. Emma looked radiant and confident as she approached the microphone. Her transformation over the past month had been remarkable, from the nervous, intimidated young woman I had first met to the poised professional standing before us now. "6 months ago, I almost left Harrison Holdings," Emma began. "I felt that my contributions weren't valued, that my future with the company was limited. But thanks to leadership that truly supports talent regardless of gender, I've discovered opportunities I never imagined possible." Marcus's jaw tightened. He recognized Emma, of course, but couldn't understand why she was being featured so prominently at a company event. "When we create environments where everyone can succeed," Emma continued, "we don't just help individuals, we strengthen our entire organization." The audience applauded warmly. Diana returned to the podium, her smile radiant. "Emma represents the future of Harrison Holdings," Diana said. "And speaking of the future, I have an exciting announcement to make." This was definitely not part of the original program. Marcus leaned forward, anticipating news about the international division expansion. "After extensive evaluation, Harrison Holdings is promoting Emma Rodriguez to Director of International Development, effective immediately." The applause was thunderous. Emma beamed as Diana continued. "Emma will be leading our expansion into Southeast Asian markets, heading a team of 20 professionals and reporting directly to the executive committee." I felt Marcus's shock like a physical force. Emma Rodriguez, the young woman he had been systematically harassing, had just been elevated to a position above his own. The promotion he had been expecting, the expansion he had been promised, had gone to his victim. "This can't be right," Marcus whispered to me. "There has to be some mistake." But there was no mistake. Diana was making it clear that merit, not gender, would determine advancement at Harrison Holdings. And she was doing it in front of 500 witnesses and multiple cameras. As Emma returned to her seat Acknowledging congratulations from colleagues, Marcus's composure began to crack. His face was flushed, his hands clenched, his breathing shallow with barely controlled rage. "Ladies and gentlemen," Diana announced, "we have one more surprise tonight. We're pleased to welcome back several former employees who have decided to rejoin our team." Three women approached the podium: Jessica Chen, Linda Martinez, and Sarah Kim. The women Marcus had driven from the company through harassment and discrimination. They looked confident, professional, and completely unafraid. "Sometime," Diana said, "the best talent requires a second chance to flourish in the right environment." Marcus was no longer whispering. "What the hell is going on?" he said, his voice carrying to nearby tables. "This is insane." Several guests turned to look at him, noting his obvious distress. I placed my hand on his arm, ostensibly to calm him, but actually to ensure he didn't leave before the evening's climax. "Maybe we should step outside for some air," I suggested. "No," Marcus said sharply. "I need to understand what's happening here." Diana was concluding her remarks, but Marcus was no longer listening. He was staring at Emma, at the other women, processing the implications of what he was witnessing. As the formal program ended and guests began mingling, Marcus grabbed my arm and pulled me toward a quieter corner of the ballroom. "Something is very wrong here," he said, his voice tight with paranoia. "These women, these promotions, this whole evening, it's like they're targeting me specifically." "You're being paranoid," I said, though my heart was racing. "Am I Emma Rodriguez gets promoted to a position that should be mine? Women who left the company suddenly return. Diana makes speeches about supporting victims." His grip on my arm tightened. "Someone has been talking. Someone has been spreading lies about me. Marcus, you're hurting me." But he wasn't listening. His mind was racing, connecting dots that led to an inevitable conclusion. "It's you," he said suddenly. "You've been planning this. That's why you've been different. Why you've been confident. You've been working against me." The accusation hung between us like a lit fuse. Around us, the party continued, but I could feel the attention of nearby guests beginning to focus on our increasingly tense conversation. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Don't lie to me." Marcus's voice was rising now, drawing more attention. "You've been sabotaging my career, haven't you? Spreading rumors, turning people against me." "Marcus, please lower your voice." But Marcus was beyond reason now. Months of hidden paranoia and buried guilt were erupting in front of hundreds of witnesses. "You think you're so clever," he continued, his voice carrying across the ballroom. "You think you can destroy me? I built my career through hard work and talent, not by playing victim like these other women." The conversation around us had stopped completely. Guests were staring openly now, some beginning to record with their phones. "These women," Marcus said, gesturing toward Emma and the others, "they couldn't handle the pressure of real business. They want special treatment, want success handed to them because they're female." I saw Diana approaching from across the room, her expression carefully neutral but her intention clear. Jake was moving closer as well, positioning himself for whatever came next. "You're all the same," Marcus continued, his voice now echoing through the increasingly quiet ballroom. "You want to tear down successful men instead of earning your own success." And then he said the words that sealed his fate. "Maybe if these women spent less time complaining and more time learning their place, they'd understand how business really works." The silence that followed was deafening. 500 guests, dozens of cameras, and a live stream audience heard Marcus Sterling reveal exactly who he was. But he wasn't finished yet. The ballroom had fallen completely silent. 500 of Manhattan's most influential people stood frozen, champagne glasses halfway to their lips, conversations abandoned mid-sentence. The only sound was the soft classical music that continued playing, oblivious to the drama unfolding. Marcus seemed to realize somewhere in his rage-fogged mind that he had crossed a line. But instead of retreating, instead of attempting damage control, he doubled down. "What?" he demanded, looking around at the shocked faces surrounding us. "Are we all going to pretend that merit doesn't matter anymore? That we should promote people based on their victim status instead of their qualifications?" Diana had reached us now, her expression carefully controlled, but her eyes blazing with fury. "Marcus," she said quietly, Perhaps we should continue this conversation privately. No, Marcus said, his voice carrying across the silent ballroom. I'm tired of having private conversations about this. I'm tired of walking on eggshells around women who think they deserve special treatment. He turned to face Emma, who stood 20 feet away, her face pale but her posture straight and strong. You want to know why women like her struggle in business? Marcus continued. It's because they're too emotional, too sensitive, too focused on playing victim instead of producing results. The crowd was beginning to murmur now, shock giving way to disgust. Several prominent businesswomen in the audience exchanged glances that promised Marcus's career was ending in real time. But Marcus was beyond saving himself now. The mask had slipped completely, revealing the entitled, misogynistic predator beneath. My wife, he said, gesturing at me, is a perfect example. Pregnant and emotional. She's been making accusations, spreading lies, trying to destroy my reputation because she can't handle the stress of adult responsibilities. The words hit me like physical blows. In front of 500 witnesses, Marcus was dismissing my pregnancy as a weakness, my legitimate concerns as hysteria, my very existence as an impediment to his success. Marcus, I said quietly, you need to stop talking. Don't tell me what to do, he snapped. I'm tired of being told what to do by women who think they know better than men who actually built this company. That's when Diana stepped forward, her voice carrying clearly across the silent ballroom. Mr. Sterling, she said, you're absolutely right that this company was built by people who understand merit and qualifications. Marcus looked momentarily hopeful, as if Diana were about to support his position. Which is why, Diana continued, I'm pleased to inform you that your qualifications have been thoroughly reviewed. She gestured to Jake, who approached with a thick folder of documents. Over the past 3 months, we've conducted a comprehensive audit of your work, Diana said. We've discovered evidence of embezzlement totaling $7.2 million, systematic harassment of female employees, and coordination with other executives to discriminate against women seeking advancement. Marcus's face went from flush to ashen in seconds. That's impossible. You can't. Federal prosecutors will be filing charges on Monday morning, Diana continued. Securities fraud, embezzlement, civil rights violations. The FBI has already frozen your assets. The crowd was no longer silent. Shocked murmurs filled the ballroom as guests processed what they were witnessing. Marcus turned to me, his eyes wild with panic and rage. You did this. You set me up. You've been lying to me from the beginning. Actually, I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart, you're the one who's been living a lie. I looked around the ballroom, at the sea of faces watching our personal drama unfold, and made a decision that would change everything. Ladies and gentlemen, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the room, I owe you all an apology for the deception I've been living. Marcus looked confused, but Diana and Jake understood immediately what I was about to do. My name is not Jen Parker, I continued. I am Jennifer Harrison. Harrison Holdings is my family's company, and Marcus Sterling has been stealing from my family for 3 years while systematically abusing the women who work for us. The silence that followed was even more profound than before. Marcus stared at me as if I had transformed into someone else entirely. You're lying, he whispered. Your father owns a small tech company. You're just a consultant. My father founded Harrison Holdings 40 years ago, I said. I've been watching you steal from us, watching you terrorize our employees, while you believed you were married to a powerless woman who needed your support. The realization hit Marcus like a physical blow. His legs actually buckled slightly as he understood the magnitude of his miscalculation. You've been playing me, he said. No, I replied. I've been protecting myself and other women from a predator who hides behind charm and professional success. Marcus's expression shifted from shock to rage to something approaching madness. In front of 500 witnesses, with cameras recording every moment, he completely lost control. You think you can destroy me? He screamed. You think you can ruin my life with your lies and manipulation? He took a step toward me, his intention clearly threatening, but Jake was already moving, positioning himself between Marcus and me. I suggest you stop right there, Jake said quietly. Marcus looked at Jake, then at me, then at the crowd of witnesses surrounding us. His career was over, his reputation destroyed, his freedom about to be taken away. He had nothing left to lose. That's when he raised his hand and slapped me across the face. The sound echoed through the silent ballroom like a gunshot. For a moment, everything froze. Then chaos erupted. Jake tackled Marcus before he could strike again. Security guards rushed forward from multiple directions. Guests pulled out phones to record what had just happened. Diana was speaking rapidly into her phone, presumably to law enforcement. But I just stood there, my hand pressed to my stinging cheek, looking at the man who had just revealed his true nature to the world in the most undeniable way possible. Marcus Sterling had just committed assault in front of 500 witnesses and multiple cameras. His destruction was complete. The aftermath unfolded with stunning swiftness. Within minutes of Marcus striking me, uniformed police officers were escorting him from the ballroom in handcuffs. The live stream had captured everything, and social media was already exploding with clips of the assault and the revelations that preceded it. By midnight, Marcus Sterling was trending nationally. By morning, the story had reached international news outlets. The footage of a successful executive publicly berating women before assaulting his pregnant wife became a viral symbol of corporate misogyny and domestic violence. I spent the rest of that evening in the hospital, not because the slap had caused serious injury, but because Diana insisted on having both me and the baby examined by medical professionals. The baby was fine, active and healthy despite the stress. The red mark on my face would fade within days. Marcus would not recover so easily. The federal charges came down exactly as Diana had promised: securities fraud, embezzlement, wire fraud, civil rights violations, and now assault. His bail was set at $5 million, money he no longer had access to since his assets had been frozen. The media coverage was relentless and damning. Business networks analyzed the case as an example of how corporate culture could enable predatory behavior. Women's rights organizations used Marcus as a cautionary tale about the intersection of misogyny and workplace harassment. But perhaps most devastating for Marcus was how quickly his professional world abandoned him. Colleagues who had laughed at his jokes and supported his advancement rushed to distance themselves from his behavior. The exclusive clubs that had welcomed his membership revoked his access. Even his defense attorney struggled to find character witnesses willing to testify on his behalf. Emma Rodriguez became an overnight celebrity, her courage in coming forward inspiring other harassment victims to speak up. The 3 women who had returned to Harrison Holdings were featured in magazine articles about workplace resilience. Diana was praised as a leader who took decisive action to protect her employees. As for me, the revelation of my true identity sparked a different kind of media frenzy. Business publications wanted to understand how the heiress to a tech empire had managed to hide her wealth so completely. Women's magazines were fascinated by the story of a powerful woman who had used her resources to bring down an abuser. But the attention I valued most came from other victims of domestic violence. Women reached out to share their own stories, to thank me for showing that abuse could happen to anyone, regardless of wealth or education or social status. Jake became a constant presence during the weeks following the gala. What had begun as a professional relationship had evolved into something much deeper. He understood the trauma I had experienced, the courage it had taken to expose Marcus publicly, and the relief of finally being free to be myself. 3 weeks after the gala, Jake and I were having dinner at a quiet restaurant in Brooklyn when he surprised me with a question that changed everything. "Jennifer," he said, reaching across the table to take my hand, "I know this might seem sudden, given everything that's happened, but I can't imagine my life without you and the baby." He pulled out a small velvet box, but I stopped him before he could open it. "Jake," I said gently, "I need you to understand something. I'm not ready for marriage, not after what I've been through. I need time to heal, to figure out who I am when I'm not hiding or fighting." His expression didn't change. "I understand. I'm not asking you to marry me tomorrow. I'm asking if you'll consider a future with me when you're ready." I looked at this man who had helped me reclaim my power, who had protected me when I was vulnerable, who had never once tried to control or diminish me. "Yeah," I said, "when I'm ready, when I've healed, I would love to build a future with you." The trial began 6 months later. By then, I had given birth to a healthy daughter whom I named Emma, after the young woman whose courage had helped bring Marcus to justice. Marcus's legal team attempted several defenses, from claiming temporary insanity to suggesting that I had manipulated him into his behavior. None of them worked. The evidence was too overwhelming, the witnesses too credible, the video footage too damning. He was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison on the financial crimes alone. The assault conviction added another 5 years. The civil rights violations were prosecuted separately, adding additional prison time and ensuring that Marcus would never again be in a position to harm working women. But perhaps the most satisfying consequence was the complete destruction of Marcus's self-image. The man who had built his identity on being successful, charming, and influential became known internationally as the embodiment of everything wrong with corporate culture. The company he had tried to manipulate prospered under Diana's continued leadership. The women he had driven away returned to successful careers. The money he had stolen was recovered and donated to organizations supporting domestic violence victims. Emma Rodriguez, now a successful executive, established a mentorship program for young women entering finance. She often spoke about the importance of having allies in positions of power, of speaking up despite fear, of believing that justice was possible even when it seemed impossible. As for me, I took over as president of Harrison Holdings when Diana decided to run for political office. My experience with Marcus had taught me valuable lessons about recognizing and preventing workplace abuse. I implemented policies that made our company a model for protecting employees from harassment and discrimination. 1 year after the gala, I received a letter from Marcus in prison. He wanted to see his daughter, to have a relationship with her, to somehow salvage something from the wreckage of his life. I threw the letter away without finishing it. Some bridges once burned should never be rebuilt. 2 years later, I stood in the same ballroom where Marcus had revealed his true nature to the world. This time, I was there as the CEO of Harrison Holdings, hosting our annual celebration of the Emma Rodriguez Foundation, an organization dedicated to supporting women who had experienced workplace harassment. The foundation had helped hundreds of women find legal representation, career counseling, and financial support during their recovery from workplace trauma. Emma herself had become one of the most respected executives in the financial industry, her story inspiring a new generation of women to speak up against abuse. My daughter Emma, now 18 months old, was at home with her nanny, but her presence was felt throughout the evening. Several speakers mentioned how the courage of one pregnant woman had sparked a movement that was changing corporate culture across the country. Jake stood beside me as I addressed the crowd, his quiet strength a constant source of support. 6 months earlier, he had proposed again, this time in our garden while Emma played with toy blocks at our feet. This time, I had said yes without hesitation. We were planning a small wedding for the fall, a celebration of love built on mutual respect rather than the false foundation that had supported my first marriage. Jake understood that I would always be financially independent, professionally ambitious, and unwilling to compromise my values for anyone's comfort. Diana had won her Senate race and was already being mentioned as a potential presidential candidate. Her platform focused on economic equality and workplace protection, issues that resonated with voters who had followed Marcus's case and understood how common such abuse was in corporate America. As I looked out at the audience that evening, I saw many familiar faces, colleagues who had supported the investigation, journalists who had covered the story responsibly, other business leaders who had implemented their own reforms after witnessing what unchecked abuse could do to an organization. But I also saw new faces, young women just starting their careers, older women who had found the courage to speak up about their own experiences, men who had become allies in the fight for workplace equality. 2 years ago, I told the audience, many of us learned difficult truths about how power can be abused, how success can mask predatory behavior, and how important it is to have the courage to speak up when we witness injustice. I paused, thinking about the journey that had brought me to this moment. But we also learned something else. We learned that when good people work together, when institutions take responsibility for protecting their members, and when society refuses to tolerate abuse, real change is possible. The applause was warm and sustained. After the formal program ended, I mingled with guests, many of whom shared their own stories of workplace transformation. Emma Rodriguez approached me near the end of the evening, her confidence now so complete that it was hard to remember the frightened young woman I had first met. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything." "Thank you," I replied, "for being brave enough to trust me." "And what do you think happened to him?" Emma asked, Marcus, I mean, do you think he understands what he did wrong? I had wondered the same thing many times. Marcus had sent several letters from prison over the past 2 years, each following the same pattern. Initial anger and denial, followed by attempts at manipulation, then promises of change if I would just give him another chance. I think Marcus still believes he's the victim in this story, I said. I think he sees himself as a successful man who was destroyed by vindictive women. That's probably easier for him than accepting responsibility for his choices. Emma nodded thoughtfully. Do you ever regret exposing him so publicly? I mean, you could have just divorced him quietly. It was a question I had considered many times. The public nature of Marcus's downfall had been traumatic for everyone involved, including me. There had been moments during the media frenzy when I wondered if a quieter resolution might have been wiser. But then I would think about all the women who had come forward after seeing our story. Women who had found the courage to leave abusive relationships, to report workplace harassment, to seek help when they needed it. No, I said. I don't regret it. What happened to us could have happened to anyone. By making it public, we showed other women that they don't have to suffer in silence. Jake joined us, carrying my coat and purse. Ready to go home? I nodded, suddenly eager to see my daughter, to return to the quiet life we had built together. As we waited for our car, Jake took my hand. Any regrets about tonight? I thought about the question seriously. 2 years ago, I had been a woman living a lie, married to a man who saw me as property, carrying a child whose father was a predator. Tonight, I was surrounded by friends and colleagues who knew exactly who I was, planning a marriage based on love and respect, raising a daughter who would grow up knowing that women could be powerful and successful and still be loved. None, I said. No regrets at all. The car arrived, and as we drove through the Manhattan streets toward home, I reflected on how completely my life had changed. The scared, isolated woman who had discovered her husband's affair seemed like a different person entirely. Marcus had been right about one thing that night at the gala had changed everything, just not in the way he had expected. He had planned to advance his career by charming influential people while continuing to abuse his power in private. Instead, he had destroyed himself completely while giving me the opportunity to reclaim my life and help other women do the same. Justice, it turned out, had a sense of irony after all. As we pulled into our driveway, I felt the baby kick gently against my ribs. Yes, I was pregnant again, though this time with a child conceived in love rather than deception, with a partner who celebrated my strength rather than trying to diminish it. Jake helped me out of the car, his hand protective on my back. Soon, Emma would have a sibling to play with, and our family would be complete. The house was quiet when we entered, our daughter sleeping peacefully in her nursery. I looked in on her briefly, marveling at how innocent and perfect she appeared in sleep. She would grow up in a different world than the one I had inhabited during my first marriage. A world where women's voices were heard, where abuse had consequences, where power was expected to come with responsibility. That was Marcus Sterling's unintended legacy. He had helped create a world that was safer for my daughter than it had been for me. And for that, despite everything he had put us through, I was almost grateful. She would grow up in a different world than the one I had inhabited during my first marriage. A world where women's voices were heard, where abuse had consequences, where power was expected to come with responsibility. That was Marcus Sterling's unintended legacy. He had helped create a world that was safer for my daughter than it had been for me. I looked around our home, filled with love and honesty instead of lies and control. Jake appeared in the doorway, his smile warm with the promise of our future together. In a few months, we would be married. In a few more months, our second child would arrive. Marcus Sterling had tried to destroy me, but instead, he had freed me to become who I was always meant to be. As I turned off the nursery light and walked toward the man I truly loved, I felt a deep sense of completion. The scared, isolated woman who had discovered her husband's affair was gone forever. In her place stood someone stronger, wiser, and unafraid. Marcus Sterling was exactly where he belonged, forgotten, powerless, and paying for his crimes. And I was exactly where I belonged, home, free, and finally, completely myself. The story was over. Justice had won.